Well, welcome everyone to this, the first, I suppose, drug science webinar on cannabis. And thank you for joining, and we very much look forward to your feedback. As I say, this is the first one of these we've done. I hope it suits your needs, and if it doesn't, definitely tell us what we could do better. So this one's on cannabis. It could, of course, be on a whole range of other things relating to drugs and drug policy, and again, share thoughts with us on those. So I think you probably know who I am. I'm the founding chair of drug science, and a man who's been pushing for many years to have more rational drug policies. And one of the reasons for that, and one of the reasons that is often overlooked by politicians, who are very keen on banning drugs, is that they often believe that drugs that are used recreationally have no medical value. So they say, well, it can't do any harm banning a drug, can it? But of course, in the case of medical cannabis, it has done an enormous amount of harm, and that's what today's talk is about, how to rectify that. And cannabis has been a medicine, probably the oldest medicine in the world. This is a Siberian princess who was found quite well preserved, so that they found cannabis seeds with her, and she died of breast cancer, so they thought she was probably using cannabis to deal with the pain of cancer, which is something, of course, that we now are encouraging people to do. In fact, that's not the oldest record of medical cannabis. The Chinese discovered it about 2,800 years BC, and it's been part of Chinese medicine for as long as that. And what I particularly like is there you see the symbol for cannabis is the same as the symbol for anesthesia. So they knew it zonked you out, calmed the brain, etc. Ayurvedic medicine also used cannabis for almost as long, and it's still widely used there. But in the UK, we've lagged behind. The first testing of cannabis in a scientific situation occurred in 1689, when a report was given to the Royal Society on the effects of cannabis, or as they called it then, the bangi. But it didn't really get into medicine until the 1840s, and that was a direct consequence of the fact that the British people, we were making a lot of money selling cannabis to Indians, which was a rather cruel thing to do, since cannabis grew pretty freely in India. But we commandeered the market for the East India Company, and we made Indians buy cannabis from us. But we also monitored the effects, and a doctor, William O'Shaughnessy, was very impressed by the medical value of cannabis as he saw it being used in India. And he came back to Britain, and he published his book, The Bengal Dispensary and Companion to the Pharmacopoeia, which was basically the first medical book on medical cannabis. And there's 25 pages, and it really does give a pretty good overview of the use of cannabis. And what was particularly interesting was that he focused on disorders such as rheumatism, arthritis, tetanus, which of course in those days was a terrifying disorder for which there was no treatment, and convulsions. So we've known, for nearly 200 years now that medical cannabis is good for convulsions, including convulsions in children. And we're still fighting that battle today. In 1870, Thomas Clouston won the Fotheringillian Gold Medal from the Medical Society of London for his work on hemp drugs and the treatment of mental illness. So in the beginning, cannabis was seen as a blessing. And in 1890, Queen Victoria, we believe, certainly Queen Victoria's physician wrote about the value, a definitive text on the value of medical cannabis. And it's generally believed that Queen Victoria used cannabis, and she used it for the pains of period pains and also the pains of postpartum childbirth. But around the 1890s, the temperance movement was developing. The temperance movement was anti all drugs, alcohol, tobacco, narcotics, and also cannabis. And debates were started in Parliament on the grounds that not only we were exploiting the poor Indian peoples by making them buy cannabis from us, but also we were making them mad by encouraging them to use a drug which caused psychosis. And so the government then set up what was called the Indian Hemp Drugs Commission. And that was a really remarkable review. It stood the test of time. Expert doctors and physicians explored the use of cannabis in India and came to the conclusion that except in extreme cases of very, very heavy use, there was really not much in the way of physical or psychological harm. As I've mentioned already, Queen Victoria liked it, and she wrote about the value to many of her close friends. And in fact, it stayed legal in Britain until 1971, which is longer than it was legal in most other countries in the world, due to the US and the World Health or the League of Nations ban in 1934. But in 1971, medical cannabis was banned. And the justification for that was that there were two rogue GPs prescribing cannabis for recreational use. And they were prescribing tincture of cannabis, which is an alcoholic solution. And they were telling people to drop it onto tobacco and smoke it. Now, generally, if a doctor is found promoting the use of a drug for recreational purposes, the doctors get struck off. And of course, we've seen examples of that in those days with opiates, and perhaps more recently with drugs like barbiturates. But you don't ban the drug because doctors are misusing it. But cannabis was banned in 1971. And the reason for that is hard to establish, but my belief is that there was a huge pressure from the United States, who had banned it as a medicine in 1934, and they were desperate for the rest of the world to ban it as a medicine because they believed, or anyway, whether they believed it or not, but they asserted that medical cannabis was a route to recreational cannabis, which of course is utterly fanciful. But it got banned, and it's still banned, except when it was banned until 4 years ago. And effectively, it is still banned from the NHS. Why did it change? Well, it changed because of this young man, Billy Caldwell. And he was having severe epilepsy. His mother was struggling to find any medication that worked. Conventional anti-epileptic drugs were not helping. So she went to America and Canada, and she treated him with medical cannabis, and he got better, stopped having fits. But she didn't want to live in Canada. She wanted to live in Northern Ireland. So she came back. And at Heathrow, she was stopped and her medical cannabis was confiscated. Apparently, the customs officers were in tears, but they said they had to do it. And within 2 days, he went into intensive care, and it was quite appropriate where they put him because he was in intensive care at St. Thomas's Hospital, which is just across the river from the Houses of Parliament. So Billy was dying within vision of the parliamentarians who had persisted with this ridiculous law. And as a result of that inhumane treatment, medical cannabis was rescheduled. The Home Secretary said that he recommended that Billy should have access to it. And the Chief Medical Officer said he could. So she said cannabis is a medicine, removed it from Schedule 1 and put it into Schedule 2. Interestingly, he had to carry on paying for his prescriptions until October 2021, even though it was a legal medicine in Britain. The NHS wouldn't pay for it. And now he's one of only 4 people on the whole of the NHS. Those 60 million people on the NHS, many of whom would value or get benefit from medical cannabis. There are only 4 prescriptions on the NHS. And that's because NICE won't support it, even for a disorder like epilepsy, which is where it's so powerfully effective. And that tells us there's a fundamental problem with how drugs are developed and used in the NHS, which essentially is that unless a drug company manufactures it and to a point where it sells it, doctors are very, very reluctant to use it. There are a lot of other prescriptions in the NHS, and those are actually on the NHS, and not on the NHS. They're in private by private doctors, and maybe there's 20,000 or more of them, but people have to pay for those. But I'll talk more about that in a minute. So why does medical cannabis work for epilepsy or for anything else? Well, the answer is that it contains at least two substances in quite high quantities. One of them is THC, delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. That's a cannabis receptor agonist. Sorry about the typo there. It is what makes you stoned. It has major effects on excitatory systems in the brain, and also has a stimulatory effect on good cytokines which reduce inflammation in the brain. But also it contains cannabidiol, and cannabidiol is a kind of antagonist at the CV1 receptor, though not directly. It has other activities, and some combination of those two produces the anticonvulsant effect. And in fact, there are commercialized, available variants of CBD for epilepsy. One of them is called Epidiolex, and they're not as good as medical cannabis, but they do have anti-epileptic activity. This slide here shows the first involvement that we as a charity, Drug Science, had with children with severe epilepsy. And this is an audit that was conducted by our group, Ryan and Schlag and myself. And there were 10 children who had reported successful outcomes using medical cannabis, mostly Bedrolite or Bedrocan, sourced from Holland. So these are parents who'd gone to Holland, got prescriptions there, paid for them, paid huge amounts of money for them. And we published it as this case series. And it became, really quite well received. Those are the scores, altometric scores, etc. It got quite a lot of publicity because it was the first systematic account, at least in the UK, of the value of medical cannabis for childhood epilepsy. And here are the data, and the data are absolutely overwhelming. And the reason I say that is because these are log scales. The y-axis, the vertical axis, is a log scale. So you go from 1 seizure a month to 10 to 100 to 1,000 to 10,000. And the orange bars are the number of seizures per month before medical cannabis, and the black bars after. And you can see in every case, the orange bar is bigger than the black bar. And in most cases, it is at least 10 times bigger. And in the case of patients 8 and 9, it's thousands times bigger for patient 9. Patients 8 and 9 ceased to have any seizures after they started medical cannabis. And overall, look at the right-hand bars. You see the mean, the average has gone from about 7,000 seizures a month to about 100 seizures a month. And that's a massive, massive change. I mean, 100 seizures a month is still too many, but it's a lot better than having thousands, because many of these children are in a state where they're almost always having a seizure. And that destroys their life. They can't learn. It's hugely stressful for the family. And also it's hugely expensive for the NHS, because very often they have to be rushed to hospital to be given anesthesia to stop them dying. As a result of this, we were approached by other parents, and we went and did another audit of now 11 patients. And we've come to the same conclusions. And overall, there's an 84% reduction in seizure frequency. Sometimes up to 50-fold reductions in seizures. So this is a second paper, or we published them together now. And there are a couple of things to point out about this. I mean, these are all children who'd failed on other anti-epileptics. Some of them were on 5 or 6 together, which was also really making a mess of their brain function. And they'd been able to come off those others. Some of them were put on surgical treatments to try to stop the seizures. And the truth is that no other treatment for epilepsy has produced a magnitude of seizure reduction of this size. So this is truly groundbreaking. And working with Larry Phillips, who's one of the drug scientific committee, who's an expert in decision theory, he did a Bayesian analysis of those 21 patients. And this paper is going to be published quite soon in the British Journal of Clinical Pharmacology. But he estimated that the next patient, the 22nd patient who goes onto this treatment, has a 96% chance of having a successful outcome. And there's almost no medicine which you can say, well, I'm going to use it. It's got a 96% chance of improving you. So these are very, very powerful findings. But they're being denied. The majority of pediatric neurologists in Britain either refuse to believe these data, or they're not allowed to believe it. They're not allowed to prescribe because it's blocked either by their professional organization or by the pharmacists who control the budget in the NHS. And the arguments for not doing it are that there haven't been randomized controlled trials. And the parents say, well, we can't wait for an RCT because our child will be dead. In fact, we know several children have died whilst trying to get access to medical cannabis. We cannot wait for this. And you don't need an RCT when you have outcomes so powerful as this. This is overwhelming evidence for at least giving medical cannabis a trial in this disorder. And Anna Schlag in drug science did a review of what it was like to be a parent of children with these problems. And here you see a graph looking at all the different benefits that medical cannabis gave to these families. And it's not just in reducing seizures, but it's also reducing stress and reducing time away from work and more time at school for the child and much less time in hospital and not having to have ambulances, blue lighting them, etc., etc., etc. You can see just graphically, I won't go through them all, but overall you can see this enormous, the benefits on the left massively outweigh the drawbacks on the right. But the main drawback, unfortunately, is the price. And people at that time were paying £1,500 a month for this. We've now managed to get it down to less than 1,000, but it's still very, very draining of families' resources, especially for families where one of the parents usually has to stay at home and look after the child with epilepsy. So here's just a comment from one of the parents. Within 3 weeks of taking Bedrolite, she started to improve. Bedrolite is a high CBD, low THC product. She started to improve massively. Basically, her life was transformed. So she doesn't use the wheelchair. It wasn't a cure, and it isn't a cure, but she was able to go out. We were managing to drop one of the other drugs. Her IQ came up massively because we've known, ever since I started in medicine, we've known that the deleterious effect of drugs like phenytoin and phenobarbital and other anticonvulsants have on cognitive function. And the quality of life has improved for these children. They have less seizures, they have better sleep, they eat better, they digest things better, they're more aware, they're more alert, they're engaging in family life. And that is truly one of the most rewarding aspects of this therapy, is that these children actually become children again, rather than just almost sort of seizure-full vegetables. It's really rewarding to see them having access. Now, the sad thing is not just that parents have to pay. The sad thing is that there are hundreds of other children in Britain who would likely respond to this medication, who are being denied it, either because their parents don't know about it or doctors refuse to allow it. And as I said, we heard of a child that died. The parents took the child to the doctor and said, we would like to try medical cannabis for his seizures. And the doctor said, I wouldn't do that. And the child died. Now, we can't say that the child wouldn't have died if they'd had medical cannabis, but the truth is that denying something that is as both effective and is relatively free of adverse effects as medical cannabis is a perverse thing for a doctor to do. So that was really where drug science kicked off in terms of getting involved in medical cannabis. And it got us thinking, well, maybe what people have been telling us for decades now, and historically for hundreds of years in the West, maybe medical cannabis has utility in other disorders. And it was generally accepted that the majority of use of medical cannabis, or even recreational cannabis, was for pain. And because drug science has an enormous expertise in a technology called multi-criteria decision analysis, MCDA, that's the technique we use to compare the harms of different drugs. And we have this expertise, particularly in the shape of Larry Phillips. We convened a decision conference to ask the question, how good is the evidence that different forms of cannabis are useful for pain? And we decided to limit it to chronic neuropathic pain because there are very many different forms of pain. We didn't want to overcomplicate things. And this particular group is a very interesting group. It's a group of experts in pharmacology, people like Val Curran, in pain management, Brigitte, she's a professor at UCL, Alan Fayez works at UCL, people who are experts in cannabis, like Dave Finn, international people like Tina and Julie from running the Danish Register of Medical Cannabis, people from Israel who are really well advanced over the UK in terms of medical cannabis use, and also some patients. And they didn't want their names put up there, but they were part of the group. And it turned out to be really important because this particular analysis asked the question, of these multiple different treatments that are used for pain, and there's a list of them there, which ones are the best in terms of benefits and in terms of reducing unwanted effects? Now you see, apart from we've got three medical cannabis products there, THC CBD mixture, CBD alone, and THC alone. And then we've got all the other drugs. All the other drugs are approved drugs, but the top three, the cannabis ones, aren't. So basically, we were comparing what we knew about cannabis with what we knew about all these other painkillers. And the way you do MCD analysis is to create an effects tree. And so we wanted to look at benefits and we wanted to look at safety. And we agreed that there were two benefits we should compare. We should compare the drugs on. We should look at pain relief and we should look at quality of life. And that turned out to be a very important decision because, and the patients were arguing for this because patients on our group had used many different painkillers and including medical cannabis, and argued that quality of life was an important benefit of medical cannabis. And then we looked at the adverse effects, and there were two main trees of adverse effects. There's the branches of the top branch adverse effects, and then the bottom branch serious adverse effects. Now, the way you do criteria decision analysis is you take each one of those, and there's a lot of them, aren't there, and you rank every single drug on each of them. And then you do what's called a weighting analysis, and then you ask the computer to collate all the data, and this is what came out. Now, the black bar is benefits. So the bigger the black bar, the better the benefits. And then the red bar is safety. The bigger the red bar, the more safety, okay? And then obviously the total together is the best overall. And you can see on the left-hand side, THC, CBD mixtures were best overall. And that was because they have high benefits, big black bar, and good safety. They're not the safest. The next one along, CBD is the safest. The red bar is higher, but the benefits are less. And then THC alone, you see the black bar is big. It's got good benefits, good for pain and quality of life, but less good for safety. And then we go along, duloxetine. You probably heard yesterday that duloxetine was the only antidepressant where there's good evidence for pain control. And then the gabapentinoids and amitriptyline, another antidepressant, tramadol. Ibuprofen's interesting. Ibuprofen's in there because we know an awful lot about ibuprofen in terms of its safety, but we also know it doesn't work in chronic pain. So it was what we call a verum. And then the opiates, methadone, oxycodone, morphine, and fentanyl. Well, you can see that overall, the cannabinoids were better than any of the others, and particularly better than the opiates. And this is a way of representing those two data sets, the benefit data on the vertical axis and the safety data on the horizontal axis. And so if you look at the bottom safety data, number 8, that's ibuprofen. Very safe, but no benefits because it doesn't help the pain. And then number 2 on the right-hand side is CBD, cannabidiol. Very, very safe and with some benefits. But what we're trying to look at is the one that optimizes both. And that's number 1. And that's the THC CBD mixture. That gives you the best balance of safety and adverse effects. If you want more benefits, you go to 3, THC alone. And of course, if you want more safety, you go down to something like CBD. But overall, this just a way of representing that that bar chart. So we argued quite strongly that THC, CBD alone, and to some extent, and THC definitely should be made available as an alternative to the antidepressant drugs like duloxetine, the gabapentinoids, and definitely the opiates. And that argument's going on and on. We published a paper just a couple of days ago, which I'll talk to you about in a minute, suggesting that in the real world, that benefit holds up. And also there's a paper published late last week from the Canadian database showing with cancer pain, there's a huge benefit of cannabinoids as well. So the world is moving slowly to the direction that our patients have told us to move into, which is the direction of using cannabinoids over other drugs because of that improved benefits safety ratio. Now, for the rest of my talk, I'm going to talk about this project 2021 because this is something that drug science is very proud of. It's something we set up nearly 4 years ago. And let me just tell you a bit about the origins of it first. So when in 2018, November 2018, the chief medical officer, Sally Davis, said, yes, cannabis is a medicine. Of course it's a medicine. And she rescheduled it. We wondered what would happen. And it became clear after a couple of months that nothing was happening. So in January 2019, just before COVID, Drug Science, we convened a conference, an international conference to look at medical cannabis and how best to try to get it rolled out where it needed to be, and also how best to collect data on its rollout. And as a result of that conference and brainstorming, we came up with this concept, Project 2021. And the idea was to, between 2019 and 2021, set up a database that would collect information on medical cannabis that was being used as a result of the rescheduling. Of course, 2 things happened quite soon after January 2019. One of them was called COVID, and the other was that no one prescribed on the NHS. And we began to see the latter developing really quite rapidly. That was the NHS was not picking up. I was actually resisting prescribing, as we saw personally with those children with epilepsy. So we realized we had to do something different. And we set up essentially a collaboration between scientists, prescribers, academics, and medical cannabis producers, so that we could get people who needed medical cannabis or thought they needed it, could get access to it in the private sector, but at a reduced price. So we did a deal with the companies to basically bring medical cannabis into the UK at cost. And that was a hugely challenging thing to do because it's still a controlled drug. It's a Schedule II controlled drug. You need import-export licenses. You need special forms to pharmacy forms. You need special prescription forms. It was a hugely challenging thing to do. And it was very clear we couldn't complete it by 2021, especially when COVID came along. And it's still running now, but it's actually turned out to be an enormously influential and important initiative. So it's a national real-world registry of cannabis, and certainly the biggest in the UK. As I said, it's a multi-stakeholder partnership, academia, industry, clinicians, and patients. We're looking at efficacy and tolerability, and this is really important. Within 2021, we are collecting data on adverse effects. And I remember vividly when just before COVID struck, I was on, I think it was BBC News one morning, arguing with the president of the British Pain Society about medical cannabis. And he was saying, we're not going to prescribe it because they'll all get dependent or go psychotic. And I said, I didn't think that was very likely. And so we've been carefully evaluating dependence and psychosis in 2021. And we've done that using a new scale of dependence that's been developed by Val Curran at UCL. And psychotic-like episodes are registered in a standard way through patients' report. The important thing about this initiative is that the data is held by drug science and we control its output. So the companies cannot cherry pick it. They can use it to present data to the regulators on use and tolerability, but we control the data. And now we've got over 3,600 patients in it and about 80 prescribers. And the way it works is that if you think you would benefit from medical cannabis, you can sign up, you can have an in-person or a virtual screen with a doctor, a prescribing doctor who's a consultant, because that was one of the conditions that the chief medical officer said when cannabis was made a medicine. You have to be a specialist. And that's one of the reasons, by the way, the rollout's been so slow, because most specialists are old white men like me who never, most of them never heard of medical cannabis, or even worse, they've been telling people it didn't work for years to justify it being illegal. So they don't really know about it. Mostly they're using treatments which they worked on in their 20s and 30s when they were doing their MDs. So the specialist hurdle is actually a big one. And the people who really need to access to medical cannabis prescribing are GPs, which is one of the things we're campaigning for now. So it's basically a private system. But for most people, they can get their medical cannabis at about £150 a month. And we targeted that price because that was roughly the price that people were paying on the black market. And we knew that over 1 million people in Britain each week are accessing illegal cannabis for medical purposes and not knowing what they're getting at all. So we've got our experts, I'll introduce them to you in a minute. We've got a registry database, which is very sophisticated and it's fully computerized. We've got the clinics and prescribers, we've got the patients, and we've got the producers. And the producers come from various countries, South America, Germany, Israel, etc. Here's the Scientific Oversight Board. I thought it was really critical that this initiative, which is very challenging in some ways and certainly provocative to the medical profession, should have a proper academic underpinning. So this is the board. We got Mike Barnes is a rehabilitation neurologist. He's been campaigning for medical cannabis for very many years. He chairs it. There's me, who knows a bit about drugs in the brain. Eileen Joyce is professor at Institute of Neurology. She's interested in Tourette syndrome, and we're collecting outputs on Tourette's. Val Curran, who's developed the rating scale for cannabis dependence when it's used medically. Adam Winstock, some of you know, runs a global drug survey, and he's also an addiction specialist. Alan Fayez is a consultant in anesthesia and pain medicine at UCL. Liz Iverson is a stroke rehabilitation therapist who is a big prescriber, trained in Canada for the prescribing of medical cannabis. Tim Williams, psychiatrist and addiction expert. And Michael Lemsty, he's an epidemiologist and he's head of the data collection. And the way we collect data is twofold. The first is we obviously collect data pertaining to each diagnosis. And to get into T21, you have to have had prior treatment with 2 established therapies that have not worked or not been tolerated. And we ascertain that by going back to your patient record with the GP. So we know that people have got the illnesses. They say they're not just ringing up and saying, "I got back pain, can I have some cannabis, please?" And then the prescribing is done by the doctors who are registered to prescribe medical cannabis. And we don't have any input whatsoever into what's prescribed. And they can prescribe CBD, they can prescribe THC, or they can prescribe a combination of them. Sorry, one thing I missed here. The other thing I want to say is that we also, and I'll show you in a minute, we also measure in every person some fundamental measures of output, such as sleep and quality of life, etc. We're linked with many of the patient charities, United Patients Alliance, Patient-Led Engagement Plea, MedCan Supports, and when new patient groups form, we welcome them to join us. So here are the scales we use for the conditions we started off with. And I don't need to go through these, but each of these is a validated scale for that particular syndrome. And of course, we collect data on other medication, etc., whether they keep on taking the medication. But the point I was just making earlier is for everyone, we measure sleep quality, because that's often reported to be improved by medical cannabis. We use the EQ5D, which is a standardized European approved quality of life measure. And we measure mood using the PHQ-9. So for over the 3,500 people in the initiative currently, we've got data for all of them on these 3 measures of quality of life and sleep. So here we go. We've got the prices. So there's consultation price, which is less than it usually is for private medicine. And the follow-ups are less as well. And the prescription price is 30. And then the costs depend on what you're getting. So it's around about £5 per gram of flour, which people put into vaporizers. And it's about the same, £5 per mil of oil. Now, I've mentioned already the resistance to what we call real-world evidence that many doctors have put up. They say, "I won't believe anything unless a drug company has done an RCT." And that's actually a very ignorant position for them to take. And particularly in the light of this book here, or this is a publication. Now, Michael Rawlins was, he was the chair of ACMD before me. So he knew quite a lot about drugs and drug misuse. He was also chair of the National Institute for Clinical Excellence and also chair of the MHRA. And so he was the leading clinical pharmacologist in Britain until recently when he died. And in 2008, he gave the annual lecture to the Royal College of Physicians about the nature of evidence, on the evidence for decisions about the use of therapeutic interventions. And he was scathing about what he saw as the primitive, ignorant position that most doctors, most pharmacists, and most regulators take in relation to RCTs. There are people who say RCT is the only piece of evidence they will trust. But he argues this, and I'll read this out. There is growing acceptance that traditional RCT clinical trial design is not the only, nor even the best way of determining the value of medicines. He argued we need a new approach to analyzing clinical evidence Project 21 is just doing just that. So this is real world evidence. This is the use of a medicine in the real world. Why did he argue that? Well, he argued that because in the real world, most people in the real world are not eligible for clinical trials because they have other conditions. They're on other medication. They don't meet the stringent criteria for RCT. So RCTs actually translate very badly into real world medicine. So what is this real world data we're collecting? Well, I've mentioned we get the demographics and the medical history. We assess the severity of their disorder at baseline and at 3 monthly intervals. We look to fill in gaps using the best statistical methodology. And as I said, we control access to the data analysis and release. And we're very keen on releasing it when we get enough. So real world evidence has challenges. There's generally more missing data because seeing people we're seeing every 3 months. In trials, you often see them every week. So there's more missing data. And sometimes coding the data is much more difficult because you've got much more complicated data with other medicines. But we think those drawbacks are outweighed by the advantages. We've got huge samples. Currently now, we have in our 2021 initiative, we have half of all the published data, patient data on pain in medical cannabis in the world, over 1,000 patients. So we get huge amounts of data. We've also got an interesting range of products. It's not just one product. We can actually see whether CBD dominant or THC dominant is different, which you can't do in a clinical trial. No one's done it because it's too expensive. And the patients are complex. And we've estimated that the vast majority of people in 2021 would never be eligible for a clinical trial. So what's the point in doing a trial if you can't do a trial on the people that need the drug? So these are the key points of Rawlins' key points. You've got problems with rare disorders like childhood epilepsy. There's not enough children really in the UK with these specific rare forms of epilepsy to actually do RCTs. Much better to do an open trial. And there are 50 drugs in Britain that are licensed based on open studies. Many of them are licensed for children for that indication. It seems weird that pediatric neurologists don't accept the fact that their colleagues in pediatric, for instance, oncology, are quite happy with open trials when they see they work. There are some trials which are unnecessary. He's mentioned this one, imatinib, for chronic myeloid leukemia. When something works so well, and I would argue medical cannabis in children works so well, you don't need a trial. Trials are there when you're not certain. We are certain. RCTs cost a vast amount of money. Trials cost, well, when he wrote this paper, he was looking at 2006 data, 3 million. These days, clinical trials are costing upward of 10 million or more per trial. And these are too expensive. And they're expensive for two reasons. They're very expensive, so people won't do them anyway. But also, because they're so expensive, people can, even if you've got the money, you can do very many. And that means that people who don't have disorders that companies want to research will probably never get data in a disorder. And then I've mentioned about the generalizability. People are often on multiple other drugs with multiple other disorders. So here's the data. As I said, over 3,500 so far. It reached 3,600 last week. Half of them have got pain conditions. 41% have got anxiety conditions, either generalized anxiety, insomnia, or PTSD. You got 6% with neurological conditions. But as you know, 6% of 3,000 is 180 patients. And you've got other conditions, and I'm going to talk about one of those in a minute. This is the point I was making about the fact that most of these patients couldn't go into trials because most of them have more than just the primary disorder. Some of them have more than 10 other disorders, and the vast majority have 2, 3, or 4 other disorders, and these are the disorders. So they'll never get studied. Okay, let's look at some of the data. So the quality of life measure is really important because essentially what you're trying to do as a doctor is to improve people's quality of life. And normally you can do that through helping get them overcome their medical problem, but you can also do it by helping them come off drugs or behaviors which are actually making their quality of life lower. And here's the data. So the mean for this EQ5D was 49. And the mean in the UK household survey is 86. So that's a massive drop. Patients in T21 have a very low quality of life. What about sleep? 63% have sleep disorders. Sleep is disordered and it interferes with their daily activity. 41% severe problems falling asleep, 35% problems waking up too early, early morning insomnia, and 40% experience problems staying asleep. So there's an enormous burden of sleep disorder. And we know that sleep disorders have a huge negative impact on mood, anxiety, performance, and also things like inflammation. So, but beginning of this year, we've got 3-month follow-up data on nearly 2,000 people. And here, bottom left, the EQ5D went from 50 to nearly 60. Now that's a big increase in quality of life. I've worked in psychiatry for a long time, since before the EQ5 was developed. And we've looked at measures of quality of life following a range of treatments. It's difficult to find a big significant increase in quality of life using current medication. But this, with medical cannabis, it was huge. So that's a T value of 20, massive T value. So very high significance. And we now prefer to talk about effect sizes rather than significance, because this is more meaningful and it gives you a better indication of whether you're changing a person's behavior or feelings or pain or whatever. And the effect size here is 0.46. Now, an effect size of between 4 and 6 is a moderate effect size. So this is pretty good. Moderate effect size. Well, very few treatments in mental health or in medicine actually get effect sizes of nearly 5.5. And we wrote this up. This is a paper that came out recently in the Frontiers of Pain Research. And we looked at their pain intensities. So here you've got 3 measures of pain intensity and 3 levels of interference with their function. And you can see on the right-hand side, the people going in, nearly 1,000 people going into the study. You've got the vast majority have got moderate or severe pain, and you've got 3/4 have got significant severe interference with the pain interfering with their life. So they're not very well. And you can see that there's also a lot of depression. So here you see the PHQ-9 scores. The bigger the score, the more depressed. You got 21% with severe depression, 21% with moderately severe depression, and 24% with moderate depression. So the majority of people have moderate to severe depression. What other medications are they using? Well, you see you've got 10% using paracetamol, 26% using tramadol, 33% use amitriptyline, venlafaxine, ibuprofen. I mean, it's interesting that you've got 19% using a drug which we know doesn't work at all. So this just re-emphasizes the points I've just made. You've got complicated patients, multiple disorders, severe pain, low quality of life, a lot of depression. Oh yes, sorry, just to point up one other point. We were criticized. People said, oh, you're just going to get young people who want recreational use. Well, we're not finding that. We're not finding people. We're finding youngish people come in, but they're not. These people are have got complex multiple illnesses. They're not simply recreational users looking for a way of getting hold of their drug. One of the fascinating outputs, perhaps one of the most important outputs of this particular aspect of 2021, is the impact that medical cannabis had on the use of opiate painkillers. That was actually quite a difficult thing to do, to work out what opiate painkillers people were on. We discovered there are 18 ways of spelling codeine. You have to go through each patient's individual data to make sure that that is coded correctly. And what we did was convert all the opiates using a standardized scale into what's called a medical morphine estimate. So you can scale all the different painkillers from fentanyl through to codeine in terms of morphine equivalents, and that makes it easier to see what's going on. So of those 1,000 patients, a third were using opiates, and their morphine medical equivalents were 44 milligrams at baseline. And at 3 months, it had gone down to 19 milligrams. Now that is something that has just happened. There was no directive to try to stop using your opiates. The prescribing doctors didn't put them on opiate reducing regimes. The patients themselves decided to reduce their opiate use. Why? Because they didn't need them as much. Now, this is a profoundly interesting finding. It's got a moderate effect size. And interventions to reduce the use of opiates are very difficult to implement, and they have very low success rates. Medical cannabis seems to achieve that in a very efficient way. In fact, about 40% of the people who started off on opiate medication stopped using it in the period we were measuring them on medical cannabis. And that's fantastic, because as you know, medical opioids are associated with a great deal of problems, particularly death in overdose. Okay, so they stopped using opiates so much, but did their pain get any better? Well, yes, it did. So here we have the pain intensity at baseline. At 3 months, it had gone down by about 1 unit. Very significant change, and an effect size, a large effect size of over 0.6. Interference of pain with life, again, it went down by over 1 point, a large effect size of over 0.6. So this really does cast a great deal of criticism or light on the argument that's been made. There have been a whole number of studies, small studies, of people given medical cannabis or given cannabis, THC or whatever, for pain. And people say, well, the effect on pain is quite small. And that's because they've looked at the effects on pain scales. They've not looked at the effect on things like interference with life and the quality of life. And here you see the quality of life. The measure goes up. Well, sort of interference goes down, the quality of life goes up, and the effect size is 0.66. Again, a very big effect size. So we're improving people's quality of life, which is what our patients tell us. That's why we started this work. And we look at the sub-units of the quality of life measure, and we can see that mobility is significantly increased, but a small effect size. Self-care, small effect size. Improvement in usual activities. People can do things they want to do but weren't doing before. Pain and discomfort, anxiety and depression, moderate effect sizes. So overall, this is really a very compelling output. And so to summarize here, we've got very positive impacts. CPMP, by the way, says cannabis-based medical products. That's a regulatory acronym. We've got good effects of medical cannabis on patients' lives. We've got very low levels of adverse effects. The ones that you might imagine are the ones that people have typically experienced with cannabis: dry mouth, fatigue, red eye. And I think we can say pretty confidently now that medical cannabis should be available to people with chronic pain syndromes as an alternative to the other drugs that they're taking, because it's likely to improve their quality of life, improve their pain, and reduce the use of more harmful drugs. At present, we can't separate which particular agents were the best, but we're working on that. So in the beginning, we had these different indications, which I mentioned earlier on, and now we've broadened it. We've broadened it now to so that anyone who thinks that they might benefit from medical cannabis can get an assessment, and then if the doctor feels it's appropriate, they can go on to treatments. And these are the indications that we are currently seeing medical cannabis prescribed for. And I want to finish by talking about this syndrome here, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Now, this is a rare syndrome where people have, particularly women, have laxity of the connective tissue. Their joints dislocate all the time. And therefore, it's associated with a very, very great deal of pain and disability. And many of them end up having particularly hip transplants because their hips dislocate repeatedly. Now, it's a rare syndrome. It's very, very unlikely that any drug company will ever do a study of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome with any drug, let alone medical cannabis, which is so stigmatized. But we've discovered that many people with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome seek out medical cannabis for the pain and discover that their syndrome is improved. And we began to get interested in this because of this case report. So this is a patient with severe Ehlers-Danlos syndrome who was actually in intensive care in hospital for long periods because she couldn't swallow because her jaw was so dislocated. She was in horrific pain. She was on high doses of fentanyl, and she was being fed intravenously through we call it, a subclavicular line, and was getting repeated infections. And in fact, she was on the path to dying. And then eventually her pain consultant said, look, all I can suggest is you go to Holland and get medical cannabis. She went in a wheelchair. Her parents took her there. So they prescribed medical cannabis there. And now, 3 years later, she is completing a university degree, and she walks occasionally with a stick. So she's been transformed. She saved the health service. She was costing the health service about $250,000 a year for admissions, and now she's not charging them anything. Despite that, they won't pay for her medical cannabis. Her parents don't have to pay, but she is doing very, very well. And we looked at Ehlers-Danlos patients in T21, and we found about 38. As I said, they're majority female, and their age range 19 to 54, so sort of youngish middle-aged females. Very disabling disorder. They've also got multiple other conditions and multiple pharmacological interventions. And here are the outputs. So this is really unpublished data, exciting data, showing that there's a real benefit of medical cannabis for patients with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Again, you see very significant improvements in the quality of life. This is the visual analog scale. This is the EDQ-5 scale. Sleep. The sleep measure we use is the Pittsburgh scale, and that is an insomnia measure. So if it goes down, they're sleeping better, and their mood gets a lot better. So we've discovered something which is potentially hugely beneficial to people with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, a treatment which we can show works. And it significantly, of course, improves their pain scores, both in terms of their severity and the interference. And this is at baseline. Severity goes down, interference goes down. So this truly is an enormous and unexpected collateral benefit from having a large database where you do quite systematic assessments of people's syndromes at entry. I'll finish by saying, there are obviously many other conditions which are relevant. We focused on a couple. Anxiety is perhaps, well, it's certainly the other major one alongside pain. It's a complicated range of different disorders: generalized anxiety, cancer anxiety, PTSD, etc. But we've also been able to show that currently, with 331 patients with 3-month data, we found that their anxiety scores reduced by half. Again, very satisfying, and for patients, a great benefit of medical cannabis. We'll finish now. If you want to learn a little bit more, then you can read some articles we've written, and you can read my essay trying to persuade doctors to take it seriously, which has met with a lot of support, but also a lot of criticism from doctors, usually based on this fallacy that you're going to have RCTs. I should say that just 2 days ago, the paper on the 2021 data was published in Journal of Drug Science Policy and Law, and that's a free download. Just go onto the Drug Science website. You can take a download of that. I'll stop. I'll take questions. I'll mention a couple of books that are relevant, my cannabis book and my hot air book, and I'll throw it open for discussion. Thank you for listening. How are we going to take questions, Mag? So are we're going to ask them to speak?
I can read them out to you, Dave, if you'd like.
Awesome. Great.
Let's do that. Okay, so first question is from Alison Brody. She asks, can you say what the general ratio of THC and CBD is in medical cannabis, please?
No, it can be anything from 100% CBD to 100% THC. I've used the term very loosely. What I can tell you is that what we recommend for all indications is that people start on a high CBD, low THC mixture, or sometimes just CBD alone, depending, particularly for anxiety, CBD alone can be effective, also for some forms of epilepsy. For pain, usually you need a CBD THC mixture, and some people with chronic severe pain, breakthrough pain like cancer pain or multiple sclerosis pain, they might start just on a THC, particularly vaped flower THC. But we always recommend trying to have CBD present as well, because we think that will minimize the risks of dependence and also of adverse effects like psychosis. And I should say we've had no episodes of psychosis and no obvious individuals becoming dependent. So I should have put a slide in on that, but I forgot. I apologize. So the answer is medical. But there's one other spin to this, which I should make clear, is that all the preparations that we have are whole plant extracts. So if there is an entourage effect, which is quite likely, you're going to get that as well.
Great, thank you. The next question is, are we any closer to being able to use UK grown cannabis?
That's a good question. I'm not close enough to the suppliers of the cannabis to actually be able to answer that. I mean, certainly a lot of cannabis is grown in Britain and is exported. I think some of the stuff in 21 is probably exported and brought back. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know. I mean, I think that it might be that some of that is getting into 2021 at present. I can't honestly answer. I'm not sure.
Okay, the next question is, will the NHS use the data collected from T21 to broaden accessibility and reimburse the cost of medical cannabis?
Well, they're not going to do the latter, I can tell you that. But I think they're, I'm so glad we set up 2021, because the day I was going to the conference, January 2019, one of the senior people at NHS England rang me up and said, what's going on? And I said, well, what's going on is we're going to do this, and we're going to have a conference, and we're thinking we're going to set up a register. And he said, well, you don't need to, because we're going to be doing trials. And I said, great. Okay, well, let us know and we'll help you, because we've got quite a bit of knowledge about medical cannabis. Let's help you. And I can tell you categorically, since then, there has been no trials. The NHS hasn't organized itself to do any studies. But worse than that, they have set up a database, but there's not a single patient in it, because Nothing is being prescribed. So we've offered them our data, and we've told them about our data, and they're very interested in our data. I think our data would justify it being used on the NHS. We actually should say we're currently doing a cost effectiveness analysis on our data, and at least in pain, and that hopefully might then persuade them it's worthwhile taking it forward. I have to say I'm glad we did it, because if we hadn't done it, it wouldn't have been done, and there won't be the pressure for the NHS to change. I think it's unconscionable that so many people who might benefit are not getting access, or are forced to go to the illegal market in order to get it. It's one of the biggest health scandals of our time.
On that note, Dave, there's a lovely comment from Helen in the chat saying, thanking everyone for fighting the good fight. And they joined the project just over a month ago. Her quality of life has improved exponentially, especially sleep quality. She says, I would never have been able to join an RCT due to having more than one disorder, and was extremely pleased to find an alternative to the norm. So case in point.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Great. Next question is from Julia Robbins. She asks, have you found any correlation between medical cannabis and the effect on autonomic function, such as that to help POTS, especially the seizure-like symptoms?
Yeah, it's well, we haven't looked at that. We haven't specifically targeted that, but we have done something relevant, which is we have done a medical cannabis trial, strong CBD, low THC trial in long COVID syndrome, which is not dissimilar to POTS. And so my answer would be, and in fact, I have recommended it to people with POTS. So I think it's definitely worth trying. We haven't got data yet, but if you've got POTS who's listening and want to sign up, and we will then eventually get the data, won't we? And we'll be able to tell you. Yeah.
Great. And next up, Helen Baker, who made that lovely comment in the chat, has asked if she'd be able to get a copy of the journal link, which you had on your second to last page of the presentation.
Every single paper we've published on medical cannabis is on the Drug Science website for free. Just click on the Drug Science website and download them. And the slides, you'll be able to download the slides. You can better listen to podcasts from me on this topic as well.
Brilliant. Okay, the next question is from Mark Dickinson, and he asks, how could you please comment on the use of medical cannabis for ADHD?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, you think it doesn't make sense, but it works, and it works because there was a trial of Sativex, by the way, by Phil Asherton, who was the sort of Britain's expert on ADHD. He's at the Institute of Psychiatry. He did a trial of Sativex, and he found it helped with ADHD. What it seems to do is take away a lot of the obsessive ruminations that people have when they're trying to cope with their ADHD. So they don't necessarily become better at focusing, but they become, certainly their quality of life improves. So that's the rationale for using it, I think. We will have that data. I mean, we've got, I don't know, 40 people with ADHD in it now. I mean, in time, we'll start analyzing that data.
Great. There's a question from Alistair Adams in the chat who asks, he says he's been suffering from panic disorder and GAD, and has been reading about the benefits of cannabis medicine to help relax and calm the nervous system. However, he says when he has it, it makes him anxious and brings on panic attacks. He doesn't want to take things like propranolol or diazepam. So is there a ratio or a strain or maybe a type of cannabis that you would recommend he looks into?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I don't know what he's taken. So what we would normally recommend with an anxiety disorder is a low dose of CBD, maybe 20 of CBD for a week or so, build up to 40, 60, build up CBD slowly. If you take a lot of CBD straight away, it might make you a little bit anxious. But CBD is the primary target rather than THC. THC can bring on panic attacks. That's well established.
Great. Okay, next question is, are terpenes important for symptom relief, or are we focusing on the CBD or THC ratio?
We don't know about the terpenes. We are trying to measure them. They're very complex and expensive to measure, so we don't have very good data. Most companies don't have very good data on what they've got. They might be useful, but it's at present it's unclear. It'll take a lot more research to know that.
Okay, question from Rob. He asked, do THC and CBD act on the CB2 receptors in the same way or similar way to their interactions with the CB1 receptors? And do CBD and THC interact with or replace the MAAH, FAAH, anandamide, and 2-HG?
Well, that's what we kind of suppose. We suppose they're substituting for a deficiency of one or two of those, or either of those endocannabinoids. Yeah, how CBD works is sort of a bit of a mystery. It's a kind of antidote to THC, but it's obviously got its own actions because it's anticonvulsant in a very efficient way. So we don't really understand it. It's through neither of those two receptors, but it does have properties as if it was working through those receptors. So the CB2 receptor being the one in the periphery, which regulates immune function, and CBD does seem to have an effect there, but it's not directly on the receptor. No.
Great. So one more question, or are you happy to take another one, Dave?
Yeah, I've got a couple more minutes, yeah.
Great. So a question from Andrew Middleton. He says, with research so heavily focused on the benefits of THC and CBD for various ailments, does any of the research also take into account the range of other cannabinoids such as CBN, CBG, THCV, etc., and whether their combination with range of unique profiles of terpenes, amaldehydes, thiols, and ethers also have an impact on the effectiveness of the medicine?
Well, of course, those things are possible. I mean, just by listing those 6 compounds, you can imagine you need a 6x6 matrix to do studies to compare them, and it would be really, no one's ever going to do that. All we can say is that the less common cannabinoids, and there's maybe over 100 in the cannabis plant, may have some value. There are companies trying to extract some of them and make them pure and promote those as pure compounds for particular disorders. Maybe that will work. It's possible, I don't know. But at present, we've decided the simplest thing by far is to just use whole plant extracts. When you've got all of them in, you don't really know what the combination is, but we eventually will find that out. Eventually, companies will gradually collect more and more data on their products. And then we'll have to do some sort of retrospective take on it and see if it's useful. But it's quite plausible that some of the rarer ones are useful as additives, but it's too early to say exactly which ones and for which indications.
Great. And we've got a question from a politician. They say they found medical cannabis life-changing. They have MS and high THC they find helps. Do we have any data for MS? Yeah,
so I said in those, was it 6 or 7, 180 neurological patients, I think probably about 50 of them are MS patients. I mean, we're getting to that's getting to a number where we could begin to analyze that data. I mean, if people had a specific request, then obviously we're very sympathetic to politicians' requests. We'd be happy to dig into that data. Write to me.
Great. I should also add that we had an MS characteristics data nugget for T21 a few months back as well. So if you want to check that out, you can go to Drug Science, click on T21 data, and you can find it there if you scroll down. So next question is from Jonathan Storer, and he asks, is there any evidence of MMJ being indicated in the treatment of alcoholism? A little bit off topic.
No, it's a very interesting question. Well, I think the answer would be to it's certainly cannabis is less harmful than alcohol. So if you got an option, switch. That's what I would say. Whether it helps, it might do. I think it's a really great question. It's quite plausible that, I mean, there are quite a lot of anecdotal reports of people getting off, stopping using not dependent on alcohol through using medical cannabis. There's some reasonable evidence.
Great stuff. And a question from Andrew Parker. Is there a difference between medical cannabis and the cannabis that you can get in places where it is legal and regulated? And if so, does this explain the greater expense of medical cannabis?
Well, yeah, the expense, no, the answer is the differences aren't that obvious. recreational cannabis in the States and medical cannabis in the States and Canada are pretty much the same things. But the difference is that medical cannabis in Britain is prepared to a much higher standard with quality control, so you actually know what you're getting. That's why it's more expensive, because it has to be made and produced at a what we call a GMP level, a quality manufacturing approach.
Okay, there's a question from Hayley Matthews. They say, I'm using 1 to 3 CBD THC ratio for breast cancer. My last scan showed stable, and there is no doubt it was coming from using cannabis. I felt very shamed by my consultant when I declared I had been using cannabis oil alongside cancer medication. I have signed up to medical cannabis, but nothing yet. I've had to go underground, as many others have. Consultants really need to stop shaming patients for trying alternatives. So my question is, can I get involved in the T21 project in the future?
I suppose in principle, yes. I mean, we are not recommending medical cannabis for we're not recommending medical cannabis for cancer, but people are using it, and I wouldn't dissuade them. I'm sympathetic. It's very common for people to be ridiculed by their therapists or consultants or nursing. I mean, there's just such a lot of ignorance, and I think the answer is you've got to just take them to the evidence and say this is why you're doing it. But you do also need to be aware, if you're using a lot of CBD, that could potentially change the amount of anti-cancer drugs you're in the blood. So you need to be a bit clear about that. But don't despair, because the evidence is going to grow and grow that there's a value in cancer. I'm going to have to roll now, unfortunately, but sorry about that. Maybe if the other people, we can we can reply to the other questions in some other way. All right.
Thank you so much, Dave. I'll follow up to everyone who bought a ticket and provide an email address so that you can drop us our questions, and we can always answer them at a later date.
Thank you, everyone. Great. Lovely to see you all.